Gittin Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, environmental awareness beyond the physical, hezek she'eino nikar. To try and do justice to a sugya like hezek she'eino nikar in 15 or 20 minutes is a little bit funny. But we'll try at least to focus down on a micro element of hezek she'eino nikar. Hezek she'eino nikar is damage which is not visible. Self-awareness is considered as one of the most important leadership capacities to have. There was a study done at Stanford University some years ago, and that's the conclusion they came to, that of all the leadership capacities, self-awareness is the most important one. That kind of assumes that a leader or a person, we've often talked about the fact we're all in leadership positions at certain times of every day, that assumes that the leader is aware of his environment. It's just, in addition to being aware of your environment, you've got to be aware of yourself. But we find very often people are not even aware of their environment. They don't notice what's happening around them. You'll have people who'll walk into the shiur and they'll walk across and they'll walk back. They won't even notice that a shiur is actually going on. People, they're in their own world, so they might have self-awareness, but they don't necessarily have awareness of the environment in which they're operating. But awareness of environment has to go beyond that. And awareness of environment has to go also to spiritual environment. You might, to be aware of what's physically going on around you, that's okay, that's already a madrega. To be aware of self, that's a madrega. But to be aware of the spiritual forces and energies and movements that are happening around you, that's a different level, but it's a level that we are required to have. To be aware of spiritual forces around us just as we are of the physical forces around us. And that we'll talk about. Rav Kook says in the Shmone Kvotzim, in the first section in Siman Ayin Vav, he talks about the fact that you've got to be able to imagine spiritual reality in your mind so that you can superimpose it, you can layer it on to the physical world in which you're operating. So that you're not operating in a physical world and as if that's the whole world and then there's the spiritual stuff somewhere else. The spiritual world is infused, it's layered on top of the physical world in which we're operating. But the physical world is visible and the spiritual world isn't. So you've got to be able to build the imagination around the spiritual world and then layer it on top of the physical world. So when you look at the physical world around you, you're seeing the two layers. You're seeing the physical layer and you're seeing that spiritual layer which you've imposed on it, and you're aware of both at the same time. And with that we'll understand a little bit more about this piece of Gemara. It starts with a Mishnah at the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis, where the Gemara gives an interesting cases. Hametameh, a kohen has a pile of truma, and a man walks up to the truma and he holds a sheretz next to the truma and he contaminates the truma. There's no physical damage. There was a 50 pounds of truma, there's still 50 pounds of truma, it's just tameh, it can't be used. Hamedamea, an ordinary person has a pile of chulin, of regular wheat, and he goes into the silo and he throws some truma into the silo. And now the whole silo can only be sold to a kohen, which means its value is much less than if it could be sold on the free market. Again, he's done nothing physical to the silo of wheat, but he's caused damage to its value. A person makes yain nesech, he stirs up the wine with the intention of avodah zarah. Now the wine can't be used, so he's deprived. So these are cases where you have extracted the value out of the object. The object is undamaged, but you've damaged the value. So that's invisible damage. It's real damage because the value isn't there. It's measurable damage. You can't get on the market what you were able to get for it, but if you look at it physically, you can't see it. What is... And your potter says, Rashi mitashlumin, there's no payment there. Omar Chizki in the Gemara on Adaf, Devar Torah echad shogeg ve'echad mezid chayev. Min haTorah, it makes no difference if the man did this deliberately or by mistake, you would have to pay in both cases. My timer, why? Because when it comes to nezek, there's no such thing as I did it by mistake. I'm sorry, I hit your car by mistake, I'm not paying. You hit my car, it doesn't matter if it was intentional or by mistake, you pay. In nezek, there's no difference between mezid and shogeg. And here, this is nezek. My time, hezek she'eino nikar shmei hezek. Doesn't matter that you can't see the result of the damage. It's there that the food has been damaged. It's just that it's not visible. That's still called a nezek, and therefore, whether it's mezid or shogeg, you're chayev. Umatan amru b'shogeg patur. And why does our Mishnah say that b'shogeg you patur, that if you did it by mistake you're patur? It's nezek. Damages should be chayev whether it's shogeg or mezid. Kedei sheyodio, in order that the person who caused the damage will tell the person that he damaged. I did this to your stuff. I was metamei your taharot. I contaminated your truma, or I destroyed the value of your wheat because I threw truma into it, or I caused your wine to become yain nesech. If I would then have to pay you the nezek, then I wouldn't tell you about it. I would just keep quiet, and I would get some pleasure from the fact that you're doing an aver without even knowing it. But we don't want that. We want the person to own up, to be honest, and to come to the owner and say, I've done this damage. Why? Says Rashi, hezek she'eino nikar kegon hani de matnitin shelo nishtanu mikamut shayu. It's hezek she'eino nikar because there's no quantitative change in the object. And that's a whole piece in the Gemara which we won't go into now, exactly how you define hezek she'eino nikar, how it's different from grama and from garmi, all sorts of wonderful things to discuss. We'll have the sugi in many places in Shas, and we'll have other opportunities to explore it. Kedei sheyodio shetimei et odima, so that he'll tell his friend that he caused the tumor or it was medamea, di mechayvet le, because if you require him to pay the damages, lo ati modalu lebailim, he won't tell the owner. And then what? So what will happen now? So I threw truma into your chulin, or I was metame your truma, I contaminated your truma or your chulin. Then v'achli yisura, the man will come to eat something that's also, and we don't want that. The big question on this piece of Gemara is, what do you mean he'll eat something? He doesn't know it's an oinus. If the mischievous man doesn't tell the owner of the food what I did, he goes along his happy way and he eats it as he would have, or he gives it to the Kohen eats it, whatever would have happened. Oinus is beyond his control. He shouldn't be chayav for that. What's so terrible? So much so that we'll remove the obligation of compensating for damage so as to make sure that he doesn't eat be'isur, even though the isur is not only b'shogeg, but even b'oinus. There's absolutely no culpability. Why is he going to be chayav? So this comes into the whole issue of understanding isurim, what the nature of a Torah prohibition is on an object. And it links into a medrash that we have on this particular parsha, on Parshas Pinchas, where Moshe is told, Tzoreres HaMidyanim, Lama ki tzorerim heim lachem. Go and deal with the Midianites because they have caused you difficulty. They caused you to do averos. Mikan amru chachamim, ba'al ha'orgecha shkeim lehorgo. This is where we get the principle from, that if you know somebody's about to kill you, you can kill them beforehand. That's considered self-defense. But the Midianim were not killing them. Rabbi Shimon Omer, minayin shehamachati et ha'adam yoter min ha'orgo. What you see from here is if you're allowed to kill somebody who's about to kill you so that you can defend yourself, how much more so if he's about to cause you to do an avera? Because if somebody, God forbid, wants to kill me, he doesn't affect my olam haba. Spiritually, I'm intact. I've just lost the rest of my physical life, but my spiritual life is still intact. But if somebody causes me to sin, to do an avera, he has robbed me not only of my physical life, but of my spiritual life as well. He's robbed me of my nitzchiyut, of my eternity. That's much worse. And so we see from there that it's more serious. There's more right to protect yourself against somebody who's about to cause you to sin than to protect yourself against somebody who's about to threaten your life. And then the Medrash goes in and talks about the difference between the Mitzrim and the Edomim. Well, they try to hurt us physically, but they can eventually marry into the Jewish nation. They're not banished forever. Not so the Moavim and the Ammonim, because they wanted to damage us spiritually. There's never any reconciliation with them. So we see from there, once again, how sensitive we have to be. So we look around, we understand what an enemy is. These are enemies, they want to kill us. It's a terrible thing. And we know what that is. And we know what it is to be surrounded by people who want to kill us. But you know what? In the Western world, you're surrounded by people who want to destroy your ruchnius. And even though it might not be deliberate, in some cases it is deliberate. When you look at the forces of modern secular liberalism and what that does and what there is in the streets of the Western world and the media of the Western world, that destroys the essence of our Jewishness. That we should see that as a greater enmity, something that we need to defend ourselves against, even more than being surrounded by Arabs who want to destroy us. Because even though not all Arabs want to destroy us, of course, but we know there are around us many who do. And that's very serious, but it's only our physical life. What are they going to destroy at the end of the day? They're not going to destroy the Jewish people. They're not going to destroy the Jewish spirit. They're physical things. Chas v'sholom, that's terrible. We lost a soldier the other day. It's a terrible thing. But the spirit of the nation stays. But in the Western world, when it comes to issues around extreme secular liberalism, we're talking about the destruction of the very neshama, of the very soul not only of the Jew, of everybody, but of the Jew as well. We need to be sensitive to the fact that's part of awareness. Environmental awareness doesn't mean we're only aware of physical contamination, of the carbon in the air, of the smoke in the air, of the garbage in the sea. Of course we have to be aware of that. But what about all the other garbage in the air that you can't see? But it's still there. It's hezek she'eino nikar. Just because you can't see it, does that mean it's not nezek? As Jews, we have to be able to imagine the nezek and see it in our minds, and then layer it on the world around us, and then we'll actually see it around us and feel and become sensitive to it. And with that, we understand, or through this, a whole lot of sense in the Mesilas Yesharim, Perik Yud Aleph, where the Mesilas Yesharim says, Ki ha'ma'achalot ha'asurot machnisim tum'ah belibo v'nafsho shel adam. The Mesilas Yesharim takes the view, as many Rishonim and Achronim do. It's not that things are bad for us because Hashem said, don't do it. They're inherently bad for us. And that's why Hashem says, don't do it. There's a tumah in tray food. There's something that messes up with our neshama. It's not just you did something wrong. Hashem said, don't do it, and you did it. No, you've eaten something that actually damages, corrupts your operating system. And the result of that is that the sanctity of Hashem that is in each of us moves away, that diminishes. We can damage the Kedushas Hashem in each individual just by the things we eat, how much more so from some of the other things we come into contact with. That's the spiritual reality, to be able to look at something treif and see in that its capacity to corrupt and to poison our neshamas. And he brings proofs from it from the Gemara and say, therefore it says the Mesilas Yesharim, Yachshov isurei ha'ma'achal k'ma'achalim ha'arsiyim. Consider treif food as poison. And therefore he goes and says, therefore they're all the gezerot, therefore we're careful and we make a distance, as there would be with something poisonous. If there's something terribly toxic, you'll see signs. Don't come near, don't come close, don't enter this area, don't touch. It doesn't just say don't eat. Because they're harchakot, you make distances, you make gedarim, you create fences around something which is dangerous. But we've lost that sensitivity. We know what physical danger is. We know what physical contamination is. If there's a nuclear fallout, we know what that is, and we make the necessary arrangements. But spiritual fallout, we don't feel. We're not sensitive to that. And we see here that the Torah is willing to cancel the shiur of compensating for nezek, the obligation to repay the damage you caused, to cancel that just to make sure and incentivize you to tell the person that you've done something which could cause him to eat something that is asur, even though he's doing it completely without intention and doesn't know anything about it. It still damages him. How much more so does it damage us when we do have intention and we do understand it? That's hezek she'eino nikar. To be able to damage something, it's not just that you're damaging the value of it. Yes, on the market it has less value because it can only be bought by a kohen or can't be eaten by anybody at all. You've damaged the value. That's one piece of it. But what you see from Chizkiah, that's Chizkiah is the one view. We've got Rabbi Yochanan as well, which is the opposite view. But according to Chizkiah, so why are you patur b'shogeg? Why are you patur when you've done it b'shogeg? So as to encourage, to tell the person, to make sure that the person will know and won't come to consume it. There's a piece that was found in the notebook of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, one of my rabbeim in Mir Yeshiva, where he writes in the name of his Rebbe, Reb Shimon Shkop. And I've told you often that Reb Shimon Shkop is so close to me in so many ways. He was Reb Chaim Shmulevitz's Rebbe. He was my Rosh Yeshiva Rebbe Mishkovsky's Rebbe. He set the tone of the Derech HaLimud, the Lithuanian method of learning in Telz Yeshiva, where my father learned. So Reb Shimon Shkop's worldview is in my DNA. And Reb Chaim Shmulevitz writes in his notebook, which is published in the Sefer Zikaron. After he died, they published the Sefer Zikaron, and they published pieces from his notebook. And he says there, and he used to speak about this often, Reb Shimon Shkop says, the reason the Torah says asur is because it's dangerous. It's not that it's dangerous because the Torah said it's asur. The Torah says it's asur because there's an inherent negativity in that. And so it's important for us in our own personal avodah, each person to their own level, just to become aware of that. There is a reality other than the visible reality, and it's all around us. The Gemara says if we would only know how many dangers Hashem saves us from every day, the viruses, we got a sense of it during COVID, invisible damage. Couldn't see it, but look what damage it caused. We've got to be aware that these things are there all the time. Hashem protects us from them. We've got to be aware of the contamination that there is all over. We've got to be aware of the positive forces of Kedusha that there are in the world and to feel them. And to be able to imagine them clearly in our minds, as Rav Kook says, so that we can layer it on the physical world around us, and we can operate in the physical world with a sensitivity, not only to awareness of ourselves and awareness of our environment, but also awareness of the spiritual environment that is layered over the physical environments in which we live.